Welcome to the Automatic Identification Teachers Institute Virtual Edition, brought to you by the Material Handling Education Foundation, AIM, and the AIDC 100.
Let's take a look at how we actually implemented it over the period 2010 to 2012 at the Blood Center, Wisconsin. First of all, we have to physically tag the blood products. And this process is done at the blood collection site. Now, let's remember that RFID is an augmentation of the ISBT 128 barcode. And the thing that makes RFID so advantageous is that it's got all the data from those 5 or 6 barcode reads that took place along the way, all in the RFID tag, so that in 100 milliseconds, you can replace reading and validating those barcodes again. But in order to get going, we have to put two things on. One is a donation number ID, and that's typically comes from a big set made by people like CompuType. They have about 10 on them because in the processing of the blood, they're going to want them to put on test tubes and other things like that. So that is placed in the upper left-hand corner of the label, as we saw earlier. And then we put a very common Avery RFID tag right above it. It's not a very big tag, like 14 by 31, but it doesn't have to be. And we designed this system around the most common ISO 15693 tag, and we'll talk about the tags in a few minutes. This is an NXP I-code tag, and it is basically corresponds to both ISO and NFC standards. Now, why did we put the RFID tag there rather than on the label or someplace else? A couple of reasons. One, we wanted people to actually see the RFID tag and know that it's there. So we originally thought about putting it under the donation number set, but that was first of all a manufacturing problem, and second, you had to put something on the DIN tag in order to let it know there was an RFID thing underneath it. And so we found that the simple, obvious thing of just putting an RFID tag on that looks like an RFID tag solved those issues. And by putting it there, when they folded over the top of the bag and then bifolded the bag, and then crammed it into a centrifuge cup, the tag, if placed there, was not bent. And then when you're going to throw it into a 5,000 G centrifuge, you don't risk getting tag breakage. And believe me, we tested that very much. So in this particular case, a very simple idea, put the tag right over the DIN label, turned out to solve multiple problems. And then there are other products that get labeled at different points in the process as well, and they get RFID tags supplied at the time of final labeling. Final labeling is after all the testing has been done and you have proved that that unit of blood is safe for use. So we used the simple I-code SLICS chip. It is ISO 3M1 and NFC form T5T standard protocol. It has 896 bits of memory. And what we put in that memory now is very important. First of all, we only use ISBT 128 barcode compliant data structures. They are ISO, excuse me, let me restart the slide.
Okay.
The RFID tag and its memory structure are very important. Here we use a low-cost NXP iCode SLIX tag. It's ISO 18000 compatible. It's NFC Forum T5T protocol, so it can be read by NFC devices as well as by ISO standard readers. It has 896 bits of user memory, which you'll see is more than enough for what we want to do. Now, the data structures are interesting, and we're going to see those in the next slide. But they're all ISO 128 existing data structures. And ISO 128 being a code 128 system uses 7-bit ASCII. And we added a couple of new data structures for additional RFID features. One of the important things ISO did is that everything is encoded as plain text bytes. The idea is to make it globally readable to anybody, anywhere. Data encryption would get in the way of that, and it doesn't really protect you from anything from a security viewpoint, because all the barcodes are on the front anyway that have all the correct data. So we simply encode those data structures as plain text in bytes. We did a lot of work on optimizing data structure. Let's take the first one here in green. The equal sign is the primary identifier for ISBT 128. One of the two primary data identifiers. You see in the the next one starts with an ampersand, which is the other primary identifier. Those first three structures are all information about the bag manufacturer info, identifying the bag manufacturer's lot number. And then the key one we get to here is the donation ID number, the red one down here in blocks 10 and 12. These are blocks as defined in the tag internal structure. Equal sign indicates that this is an ISO global data structure. The A followed by 4 digits like W0364 is the blood center of Wisconsin. That is the blood center. Then you see here in the red structure YY for the year of collection, and then a 6-digit number, which is a serial number for that bag in that year at that center. And then there are a couple of little things which I won't try and explain, FF at the end. But this is a simple tag, and the data can be updated. The one thing that gets locked in this is immediately is the donation number. That gets locked at the time that it's written. Everything else is information that's collected along the way from processing or during processing of the blood bank. And then at the end, when everything is done, okay, things like the product code, lines 18 and 20, and the ABORH, line 16, are also put in there and locked. The expiration date changes as you do additional things to the blood bag. You may put it into inventory, and then a hospital asks it to be irradiated for various reasons, and that will change the expiration date. of the blood. But this is a simple tag structure. Everything was designed for contiguous block reading, and everything was designed to be as simple as possible, given the technology of the time. And this is about 2011. Okay. We worked very closly with TagSys, which in the 2010 era was probably the leading manufacturer of HF RFID readers. And they had a couple of particularly important types of readers. The basic reader we used everywhere was a 4-channel reader, and it may read different, may not always be just one side of location. In fact, we may have a reader which has 4 detectors at different points in operations, but the data is amalgamated and uploaded to the computer. Now, I want to point out 2 things. You'll see a tray of blood bags at the bottom. They're typically about 20 in a tray, and they're typically all the same ABO type. Blood banks are still pretty manually operated. We discovered that there was a chute reader, which TagSys had made, where we could take one of these trays and during check-in, because we had the RFID tags enabled, we just ran it through the chute. I mean, you just manually put it through a 5-second operation. The thing was, the RFID tags were all read, and you didn't have to pick up any bag and scan any barcodes. So it made what was typically a 15-minute process into more like a 15-second process. The other thing on your left, this is a standard TagSys 60-centimeter tunnel reader. Very elegant design in terms of how the magnetic field is manipulated inside this tunnel. Now you could take an entire full container and put it through and read all 30 bags in there just by sliding it through the reader. It was much more important in terms of how we used it during the final shipping, where we were reading sealed shipping boxes, all by passing them through this tunnel reader. Now, at the time, we had a brand new product which had been developed by Unitech called the PA600 mobile system, which looks pretty passe now, but it's a combination barcode scanner, 13 megahertz reader, wireless LAN, a lithium ion rechargeable battery, a nice display system, and it was at the time great. But nowadays, everything there is all in an NFC enabled smartphone. And furthermore, the advantage of an NFC enabled smartphone is it can give it to the user in his native language, whether it's a blood center in Boise, Puerto Rico, okay, or Ghana. You can have the information in your native language as well. And so the choice of HF RFID was very prescient in terms of NFC-enabled smartphones. Now let's talk about how we integrated this into the existing blood enterprise computing system. This is the software. It's sort of like the SAP of a blood bank. It does everything in terms of connectivity and processing and distributing data. In this case, we used an RFID middleware application developed by a company called S3 Edge. And it was based on the Microsoft BizTalk RFID platform. And we had an RFID reader interface, which, since we're using standard TagSys readers, basically TagSys supplied that software. But the BizTalk application had to convey this information through the LAN to the Blood Enterprise computing system. And so we did it through a very simple web services interface. And at that time, it was a very standard interface used by virtually all Blood Enterprise computing systems. And so we could use anybody's Blood Enterprise computing system software and interface to it through web services. And that was a very useful thing to do at that time. And and it avoided making any change to the BECS, because that particular system is highly regulated by the FDA to make sure that, you know, it works exactly as advertised and is not subject to either hacking or subject to misuse. All right, now we built the system, and in fact, we did. We actually built it into the operations at the Blood Center, Wisconsin. So now, what's the next thing that the RFIDs system needs? Pilot testing. Let's make sure the thing really works in operation, and let's find out what we did right and what we did wrong. All right, so what was the purpose? One was to prove to the FDA that the damn thing worked and that everything was safe and efficacious. But basically, we wanted to assess the use of RFID technology, the tags and the readers, in a real-life production environment, starting with patient collection at the blood drive site, through blood center acceptance and processing, after testing in final labeling and inventory control, and in assignment and shipment of various blood units to the hospital in order fulfillment. And the tunnel reader allowed us now to do 100% shipment verification. Part of the pilot testing was to establish a comparison between current barcodes-based processes and RFID-enabled processes, and to make formal assessments about were there gains in safety, efficiency, particularly labor efficiency, and in the quality of the results enabled by RFID. So ultimately, we talked about the need for this system having an ROI. And so this was basically a way of providing the input data for that. So in 2012, and over the space of about 3 months in the summer, we tested this. We managed 12,000 collections from the time that the patient showed up in the hospital basement, or excuse me, the donor showed up in the hospital basement, through processing of that collection and shipment to the hospital. And in addition to that, we tagged 100,000 products already in our inventory, particularly to test out the back end of the system, the shipping and shipping validation. A couple of interesting things about the technology, which was obviously new, but pretty well established. We had a stable operation. We had no tag failures in any of our 100,000 plus tags. All the pieces worked very well, and they were well designed so that very little training was necessary, particularly with that Unitech handheld. Their RF performance was not great, but it's about equal to what we have in terms of NFC performance on a smartphone today. But the biggest thing was the tunnel and chute readers. The chute readers saved a tremendous amount of time in blood bank check-in and also searching for a particular blood bag in a tray, because you could just run the whole thing through and get all the data from 20 blood bags in 15 seconds. On the other hand, the shipping accuracy dramatically improved because, yes, people have to pack those shipment containers and they try and get it right, and they create manifests. But after they've closed up the box, now we could take that shipping container, run it through our 60 centimeter tunnel reader, and read everything in the box at once and get 100% a rectification against the shipping manifest in seconds. So now we could find errors before we ship the box. And that has a huge impact on blood center operations, because if you leave out a couple of units or put in a couple of wrong units and ship it to that hospital, and they are expecting, certain blood types, and they are there, you may have to make another trip out just to special deliver the stuff that you forgot. Also, if you put stuff in that they hadn't expected, it rarely gets returned. It just goes into their inventory. So there's a huge economic impact in having 100% shipment reconciliation. As for the hospital, we tested this with a transfusion service at the University of Iowa Hospital in Iowa City, and it had a lot of operational advantages in terms of keeping product visible, particularly in remote storage units, and ability to show when product was checked in and removed from a temperature controlled environment so that stuff didn't get left out in places. But the biggest issue was testing this in this augmented three-way match system. And University of Iowa had developed their own barcode-based system for this. And so we had a chance to see how well the RFID system did in comparison with the barcode-based system that they had developed already. And it turns out both the barcode and their RFID system detected all the errors and exceptions equally. So let me summarize the pilot test results in one slide. The blood center outcomes, the biggest thing was we had a 33% reduction in error rate for units which were misplaced during blood drive collections. And we also not only had labor efficiency gains, we had eliminated a lot of units that got thrown away because they were mislabeled. We had an 87% reduction in misplaced products during check-in, a huge decrease in inventory, a check-in of final label blood bags, 63% reduction. And the biggest thing from an economic viewpoint was the 100% shipment validation. And we should have thought about that in the beginning. We were focused on the other stages, but the hugest impact from a dollar viewpoint was 100% shipment validation. So there were no shipments with missing, incorrect, or extra products. And using RFID and returns processing reduced the exception handling substantially. In the hospital, the biggest thing was a dramatic increase in product viability and product visibility within the hospital because the RFID tag could tell you where the product was. And it didn't have to be necessarily, manually read to do that. We had real visibility in recording the start and end of patient transfusion. The three-way match system was tested using 604 product bags and 144 transfusions. We had 0 errors in the three-way match system in the RFID system. And we even detected 1 error in the existing hospital's barcode system. So what do we conclude from all this testing? There's a real economic justification for RFID enabling, particularly in the blood center. In terms of quality gains, eliminating discards and lost products, and in shipment accuracy. And every time you make a mistake, you have to do what's called an FDA exception report. Those take several hours. And reducing that or eliminating FDA exception reporting is a big impact on your labor. We had great efficiency gains and with reconciling, particularly in shipment reconciliation, and the total cost recovery for this system in a large blood center, that's large blood center being say 500,000 units a year or more, cost recovery of all the hardware and all the implementation and training is less than 3 years. There is definitely a patient safety justification for RFID in the hospital. And the safety justification is the primary justification there, which is hard to quantitate. What did we learn and confirm in these tests? The use of existing barcode data structures in RFID tags, along with standard RFID tags, works very well. All the ASCII data structures that were developed for ISBT 128 can drop right in to a simple HF tag. The RFID guidelines that we developed about the use of HF RFID worked well. All the testing was sound. And the bottom line is that the HF RFID works very well with no safety issues. Integration with blood center enterprise computing systems and hospital blood bank systems and lab patient setting works very well if you use standard middleware and interface systems like BizTalk RFID in that case, and things like a basic web services interface. One of the things we learned is that people, process, and technology have to all work together. And we spend an enormous amount of time re-engineering the processes in the blood center because of the technology change to RFID. For example, we spend an enormous amount of time on process re-engineering at the blood center, Wisconsin. Certain things that we did during check-in now moved out to the donation site so we could take advantage of the RFID tag and the benefits it had in ensuring that shipments from the donation center, from the blood drive, got properly input to the blood center with minimum labor and minimum errors. And we looked at blood center operations, and even for a middle-sized blood bank, such as Blood Center Wisconsin, which was then about 230,000 units a year, even for that, there were several FTEs in terms of process and labor efficiency gained. So the bottom line is I've talked a tremendous amount about the environment, about the FDA, about blood banking in general, and about the way hospitals and blood banks work. Because unless you understand all that stuff, you are not going to come up with a system that is worked this well out of the box. And it's a question of RFID engineering has to be thought through in terms of the environment you're working in. And when you get into healthcare environments, you have to deal with regulatory constraints, and you have to deal with systems and procedures that exist and augment them rather than try and replace them, or you'll never get it accepted. So I've summarized 6 years worth of work that we did, and the whole system works. And the FDA has approved it in 2013 for deployment throughout the United States. And I think that over the coming years, you will start to see it. One of the biggest enablers, aside from ISBT 128, is the smartphone, because it can do all the barcode reading, all the NFC reading, and all the translation of the data into local language, which totally enables the use of RFID during natural disasters and during military operations. So there's a lot of technology, and UHF in this case is probably, a solution, but should people want to adopt it, there's going to be a lot of safety testing involved. So this is a case where the technology fits the application and has only been enabled more through the development of the NFC-enabled smartphone. If you're interested in reading further about this, I put down the key publications. If you're interested in ISBT 128, you can download the technical specification for free. When we first issued it, it was about 40 pages. Now it's, I think, 534. So you can see that its use has greatly grown. And the other papers are more technical. If you're interested in the equipment, the paper, the second paper on testing is a really nice paper on antenna design. But then all the testing results have been summarized and published. And an interesting paper that may be useful to people is the sixth one down by Gutierrez, Holberg, and Nicolalde, Engel, and Hochschild, which was about high frequency tag survivability in harsh environments. That turns out to be a very practical problem in many applications, both HF and UHF. And I'm very pleased with how our students at University of Wisconsin developed some of these test protocols and how they measured it. And so that's something that's useful outside blood banking and that. So I want to thank you all for attending, and I hope this has been giving you some insight to the fact that a project of this magnitude, particularly in a highly regulated environment, requires that you need to fully understand the environment you're working in and fully understand the technology that's already there and how you can leverage it for your RFID application, and work with the regulators. Don't treat them as how would you say it, as barriers, but rather treat them in a cooperative way, and you'll get a tremendous amount of help in actually getting your regulatory approval. So thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. Please remember to subscribe, like, and we hope to see you next time on the Automatic Identification Teachers Institute Virtual Edition.